Hey everyone, computer gaming has become quite confusing in recent years because you look up a benchmark video online and they'll say things like Cyberpunk 4K DLSS quality, parenthesis 1440p, RT on, MFG times 3. And you're looking at it and thinking, what the heck does any of that mean? And is it marketing guff, or do you actually need all of those things? Do you need DLSS and MFG? Well, I'm going to show exactly what those fancy terms mean in this video. And I got two computers here and I'll show you on both of them. And this particular one has a 4K monitor and an AMD graphics card. It's a mid-range one, and as a result it struggles with 4K gaming, which is why at the moment it's in a 1440p window, and I'll talk about that in a minute. And then I got this system which has an RTX 5080, and this Nvidia system is much better at gaming, but obviously that's mainly because this graphics card is a lot more expensive than this one. The purpose of this video isn't for me to, say you should buy a AMD graphics card or Intel or Nvidia graphics card. I just want to explain what all of the confusing gaming terms actually mean. And really there's three main groups of terms that you need to be aware of, and that is upscaling, frame generation, and path tracing or ray tracing. And that's where we start off with the AMD based system that I've got with the RX 6700 XT, which is more of a mid-range graphics card. And at 1440p, let's have a look. So that's 1440p, I've got a low preset on, and I've got no fancy stuff on. I've got no upscaling, no ray tracing, and no frame generation. And I'll explain all of those terms in a minute. But by default, I'm getting around 90 FPS. When walking around here, which actually isn't too bad to be honest, but it is quite a low preset. And if I did want, super fancy lighting, which is called ray tracing or path tracing, then all of a sudden my FPS rates are gonna be really, really low. And that's where upscaling actually comes in. And to explain that, I'm gonna close this game actually, if I completely close it, and get a Linus meme face, because I think it'll be funny. But basically, let's say you get a super low resolution image from the internet. This particular one, if I actually look at the native, that's the actual size. So just down there, that's the native size of this image. And then if I was to actually upscale it, then let's see what happens. So that would be 4K. And if I actually say I want it displayed at the full 4K, what you actually notice is this a pixelated mess. The reason for that is the base image is so small that when you try and upscale it to like a 4K monitor, it's not going to look very good. And that's kind of the problem you have with computer games too. Because while Cyberpunk there looks pretty good, it's only at 1440p. If I come along and I actually say in my settings, I want to play at 4K, because obviously I got a 4K monitor, and I apply that, even though I'm on a low preset, what'll actually happen is my FPS rate will dip down to the 40s, which some people consider playable, but if you've got like a 144 Hz monitor, like I do here, then you don't really want to game at 45 FPS. It's not exactly going to feel very good. It's going to feel quite slow and jittery and things like that. So I need to fix it somehow, and that's where technologies like upscaling actually come in, and that's where we're going to start off, because frame generation kind of leads on from that, but let's start with upscaling first. So right now my game is running at 4K. If I actually go into here, I've got something called resolution scaling. And if I go here to FSR 3, which is the latest version at the time of filming, but AMD are working on FSR 4. If I go to a performance preset, and I'll talk about what that means in a minute, I click on apply, and instead of getting 40 odd FPS, I'm now getting pretty much double that, which is pretty good. And actually the game looks pretty good. I mean, there are going to be some issues with upscaling that I'll talk about throughout this video, but in general what this has done is, do you remember earlier I actually had things rendered at this window there of 1440p? This game's actually done something similar. It's taken the 4K image, and instead of doing 4K, it's actually rendering it at a lower resolution, and then it's actually upscaling it to 4K. But because this is actually, FSR has actually been coded into the game, the upscaling is going to be better than if I simply go to a game that doesn't have upscaling and I upscale it, naturally via the system upscaler. It's not going to be as good as something like here, because FSR, XeSS, and DLSS, which are actually developed by Nvidia, AMD, and Intel, they actually hook into the game, and as a result, those upscalers are often better than you otherwise would have. But there are some times where it doesn't look that good, and actually I can feel that it just doesn't look quite as good as you'd expect, especially for 4K gaming. And the reason for that is when I actually set things up, in the settings I went for performance mode, and what that means is even though I'm saying I want to game at 4K, What's actually happening at performance mode is it's internally rendering at 1080p and it's upscaling it by a factor of 2, meaning it's going from 1080p to the 4K resolution. If, however, I said, right, I don't really like that, I can go to the quality mode, and don't worry too much about, quality and performance. To be honest, you just need to test out and see what works for you. But in this case, I'm going to go with quality, and yeah, my FPS has dipped. Instead of being, it's now sort of mid-60s, which isn't exactly ideal, but it does look a little bit better. And it's always hard to show this off on a YouTube video because I could record this video at 4K like I'm doing now at a really high bit rate, but then the YouTube algorithm compresses things down. But I can say with certainty that certainly this graphical quality is better at that quality mode than with the performance mode, but it does have an FPS hit because essentially it's rendering it at, a higher base resolution. So don't worry too much about that. But if we go back to the Linus Tech Tips example, it's basically upscaling is all about working out the best sweet spot for where you want to be. So you've got a low base image, and you might be saying it looks kind of good up to there, but then after that it doesn't look too good, and you just play around with the settings and things like that. But that's really what upscaling is all about, is actually saying, yes, I want to game at 1440p, but my graphics card doesn't support that, so instead I'll render internally at a lower resolution, and then that will be upscaled. And it does work fairly well, and this technology is coming on all the time. And upscaling is a pretty useful tool because, as you've seen, I'm now gaming at 4K or 1440p under the hood. I'm getting 70 FPS, and this particular monitor is only 60 Hz, meaning anything above 60 FPS is kind of wasted. So actually, this is a good playable FPS rate, really. And that's actually FSR, which is an AMD technology, but you can actually come along and use Intel's one if you wanted, XeSS. You don't need an Intel graphics card for that. So I could come along and do XeSS and use that one instead. And to be honest, I think it performs fairly well. I mean, compared to FSR3, I don't notice any major difference, and I get a higher FPS rate as well. So that's actually quite impressive. What that then means I might be able to do is actually turn up this, so maybe I can game at high instead. I don't know, let's actually try that out. Yeah, okay, that's actually working. I'm actually hitting 60 FPS, and the game looks better because I've been able to actually dial up my graphical presets. Things just look a little bit better, there's better textures, things feel a bit more lifelike. And actually, as you can see, even though I got an AMD graphics card on this particular system, I could go with Intel's algorithm because often these technologies are open sourced and you can use them irrespective of what graphics card you've got, other than DLSS. Often that is an NVIDIA only feature, you need an NVIDIA graphics card for that, but essentially that is upscaling and it's coded into specific games. What that does mean though is not every game supports DLSS from NVIDIA or FSR from AMD or XeSS from Intel. Not every game actually supports that. So if you've got a game that doesn't support it, you can just rely on the natural upscaler, or there's a tool on Steam called Lossless Scaling, and that's actually a pretty fun application. And basically what that allows you to do is actually you can choose to upscale a game from a lower resolution, and then it uses its own algorithm, and actually it does a pretty good job of that. And I won't dive into it too much, but for this segment of the video, that is upscaling, is essentially you can, game at a higher resolution, but internally the actual graphics card and the game algorithms and everything else actually takes care of rendering it at a smaller resolution and then upscaling it back. But now I'm going to move over to this system just so we can get slightly higher FPS rates.
A few moments later.
Right, it's finally loaded. It always takes a little bit of time, Hogwarts Legacy, because it always says preparing shaders on every single load. It is quite an annoying game in that sense. But by default, I've got everything maxed out and I'm doing native 4K renderings. There's no upscaling. What you see is what you get, really. There's no tricks under the surface or anything else. And my FPS rate is between 55 and 60, with 1% lows in the 40s, and that's not really ideal. But actually, I could obviously use upscaling that we looked at earlier and things like frame generation and everything else as well to try and boost my FPS rate up, hopefully without, getting a worse experience or anything else. So I won't touch on upscaling too much because I already looked at it on my AMD system. But in this case, I could come along and I could say DLSS quality, which renders internally at 1440p. So effectively a box there that then gets upscaled up to the full 4K resolution. Suddenly now I'm getting an FPS rate in the 70s, so instead of getting below 60, it's now above 70, and my 1% lows are a lot better as well. But actually I might want to achieve more than that, and if I really don't want to, lower my graphical settings, what I can look at doing is something called frame generation. And this has been a bit controversial, people talk about fake frames, but essentially what's happening right now is my game, while I'm walking around, the graphics card is actually spitting out 70 frames every single second. FPS means frames per second. So basically you've got those 70 frames, they are real rendered frames. But what you can do with frame generation is have a technology that actually inserts a fake frame in the middle of real frames. So if you had 2 times frame generation, instead of like 70 FPS, you might get 140 FPS. But of course, it's not quite as easy as that, because when you turn on frame generation, you do actually get a little bit of an FPS hit. So I'm probably not going to go up to 140 FPS, but let's actually have a look and see what happens. So I'm going to come in here and I'm going to go to frame generation, which is currently off. And I'm going to say 2 times frame generation. Oh, actually it's close to 2 times. Yeah, so instead of 70 odd, it's now gone up to around 125 to 130. My 1% lows here are actually wrong. They're not completely tracked, so don't worry about that. It's actually still showing the original non-frame generated one. But in general, although I haven't quite gone from 70 to 140, I've gone up to almost 130 FPS, which is pretty good. And as I said, frame generation is considered a little bit controversial because people sort of say if you're spending loads of money on a graphics card, you shouldn't have fake frames. Your graphics card should be powerful enough to, actually render things without software trickery and things like that. But the reality is frame generation is actually pretty good now. It was introduced with NVIDIA, it was introduced with the 40 series of cards, and AMD also rolled that out with FSR as well. So when you have FSR upscaling on, you can do 2 times frame generation, which means a fake frame is inserted in between the real frames. And I don't like fake as a word because it's not really fake frames. I mean, everything here is fake really. But with FSR or DLSS, you can have a fake frame inserted in between the real frames, and it does lead to some pretty good results. I mean, you will watch some YouTube videos that show that there can be little visual artifacts and things like that. And if you know what you're looking for, you can sometimes see some problems once you've enabled, frame generation. But in general, if you have a higher refresh rate monitor, frame generation is really good. And to test that more, I'm going to actually whack up the frame generation a little bit. Because I got 50 series card, I can actually have 4 times frame generation if I wanted. So what that means is for every real frame, you then get 3 fake frames inserted in between to achieve that times 4. So essentially 1 real frame and then the 3 fake ones for 4 times. And what that means is my FPS rate should go up quite a lot now. Yes, it does. So now I'm above 200 FPS. Again, ignore the 1% lows, that's actually broken. But in general, what's actually happening now is my 5080 graphics card is actually generating 3 frames for every 1 real one. That's essentially what frame generation is. And just like upscaling, not every game supports FSR or DLSS or XeSS, and as a result, you won't always have native access to this particular version of frame generation. But that's why actually AMD and NVIDIA have other technologies they've brought out where you can basically enable some level of frame generation even outside of games that support DLSS. So even if I'm playing a game that doesn't support DLSS and frame generation, I can actually enable a setting within the NVIDIA app that will actually allow me to achieve that, which is pretty cool. But there's a general problem with frame generation, which is that in general, you should only enable it when you get at least 60 FPS. Because basically the frame generation algorithms need a lot of data, frames in other words, to actually work out how to add in the fake frames in between the real frames. So if you were playing a game that only had, 15 FPS, and then you said, I want 4 times frame generation, you're not going to get a really smooth, buttery 60 FPS via that upscaling. What'll actually happen is you'll get a jelly effect where everything looks a bit weird and as though you're literally gaming in a lump of jelly. It's a bit hard to describe. So frame generation is a little bit controversial, partly because people are talking about fake frames and real frames and all that, but also because you need to start off with like a pretty good 60 FPS average to then have frame generation. And if you've only got like a 60 Hz monitor like this one, then it's pointless, because if you go from like 60 FPS to 120 FPS, you're going to lose a lot of benefit because it's still only a 60 Hz monitor. But when you do get a higher refresh rate monitor, 144 Hz or 240 Hz or whatever, then frame generation is actually an increasingly useful tool. So that covers frame generation and the pros and cons of it, especially if you haven't got a high refresh rate monitor. But next I wanted to talk about path tracing and ray tracing, which are slightly different technologies. People often conflate the two, but one of them is more accurate than the other, but actually it's a really useful set of technologies. So if I come to this particular bit of Cyberpunk, and Cyberpunk is always a really good example for ray tracing, I've got ray tracing on and everything's completely maxed out. So we can see here, I got ray tracing enabled there. if I actually turn it off for a second, so that's it with path tracing disabled, and it still looks pretty good. I mean, you've got the shadows from the headlights, the lights there, you've got shadows there, and everything else, and it does look pretty good. But at the same time, in my opinion, it doesn't look quite as good and draw you into the game, and it doesn't feel as immersive as when you have path tracing enabled. But there's a reason that people disable it, and it's that actually tracing rays and things like that, light rays, is really hard to do. And that's the whole point of these technologies, is basically path tracing and ray tracing, which are slightly different, but they calculate different light sources and where they would fall onto particular surfaces, and actually it ends up making games look a lot more immersive, and it's actually pretty amazing technology. I mean, 3D modelers, they tend to get like 1 FPS maximum when they're actually doing, 3D modeling and doing ray tracing and path tracing and things like that. So the fact that games can actually even attempt to do it, even with some hacks and fudges and stuff, it is pretty impressive, but it does come at a big cost, because right now I'm seeing an FPS average of 222 FPS, and that is with frame generation 3 times turned on. I've accidentally left that on, so it is worth pointing out. But if I actually come along and I turn on path tracing and ray tracing there, and they are slightly different. It says here about path tracing is a step up from ray tracing, so you've got ray tracing there, path tracing is a step up again. But if I enable both of them for the best possible experience, what you're actually going to see is, firstly, things do, in my opinion, look a lot better. The light looks a lot more natural, and things just bounce around a lot more. It's kind of hard to explain, especially when YouTube actually compresses, video quality down and stuff. But in general, light actually does reflect around quite a lot. But if I actually reset my FPS counter, because it keeps messing up for some reason, I'm actually now getting 120 odd FPS average. So almost half what I was seeing before. Instead of 200 odd, I'm getting 120 odd, and that isn't exactly great. Obviously, it's literally by enabling ray tracing and path tracing, my FPS was almost halved. And so if you've got, a much more budget graphics card, like my RX 6700 XT, which I'm not hating on, it works out really well for me, this graphics card, but this would struggle loads with actually path tracing and ray tracing and make the game completely unplayable, whereas NVIDIA cards in general tend to be better at ray tracing and path tracing and things like that. And this isn't, I said at the start of this video, I wasn't going to say, AMD is better than NVIDIA or vice versa, or you should get an Intel graphics card, and I'm going to keep saying that, you should just buy whatever graphics card you can afford with your budget. But actually, NVIDIA graphics cards at the time of recording are a lot better with path tracing and ray tracing. And so if, when you're looking at gaming graphics, this has obviously crashed, but if you're looking at gaming graphics and you're thinking, oh yeah, I really like the look of a ray traced experience, I think I would prefer that, you might at the time of filming want to consider an NVIDIA graphics card. And I hope this video summarizes things quite well for you. If you've got any questions though, please let me know down in the comments. And other than that, thanks for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, please click the thumbs up button, and please subscribe to see more videos like this. Thanks for watching.